A blessed evening to everyone. We will continue with our series entitled Blessed Are, and this is the third sermon within that series. And we will be basing our meditation tonight from the book of Matthew chapter 5, verse 5. And also we will be looking at another passage from the writings of the Apostle Paul in the book of Ephesians chapter 4, verses 1 to 6. So let us read it from Matthew chapter 5, verse 5. And Ephesians chapter 4, verses 1 to 6. I will read from the New American Standard Bible 1995 edition. The word of the Lord says, "Blessed are the gentle, for they shall inherit the earth." In Ephesians, "Therefore I, the prisoner of the Lord, implore you to walk in a manner worthy of your calling, with which you have been called, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, showing tolerance for one another in love, being diligent to preserve the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, just as also you were called in one hope of your calling, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all." May the good Lord bless the reading of His word. I want to know tonight if there are some of you here who have commuted, coming from your house or wherever you may have come from, coming to church. Please raise your hand. Individuals who commuted a jeepney, a tricycle, okay, I saw some hands. When I was a student in Ebenezer, I was a commuter like you. And I was ministering here in Zikaik way back in 2000, I think as early as 2002. I already came here for Sunday ministry. And every after Sunday ministries, I commuted going back to Ebenezer. And usually, it was around 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock in the evening. One thing I have noticed was that every time I waited for a jeepney, which was very limited back then, the people will not just fall in line whenever they are in the terminal of the jeep. People would wait for the jeep to arrive and would rush going to the jeep, even if the passengers did not go down yet from the jeep. That was the practice back then. And I observed that if you are not strong enough and fast enough, you will not be able to secure a seat for yourself. You will end up hanging at the back part of the jeep as you go home. And you would still pay the exact amount even if you are not able to secure a seat for yourself. And so that was the practice then. It's a bit better now because I have seen some passengers there. While they were waiting for the jeep, there was really a proper queuing. And they follow a line. And if you want to ride, go somewhere, you just have to follow the line and wait for the jeep to come. And then ride after the other. But back then, there was no order like that. You had to run. You got to be strong. You got to be quick in order for you to secure a seat for yourself. And while I was there, I said, these guys here are not really gentle. Because there were times that there were women who were not able to secure seats for themselves. There were handicapped individuals. There were people who were a lot older than those who were seated, and they were just hanging there at the back part of the jeepney. And if I'm going to observe that, I would really be looking for the gentlemen. Where are the gentlemen? Because as part of our Filipino culture, that's really expected. Filipinos are supposedly gentlemen. That was the olden days, but no longer this time. A more recent experience when my wife and I studied in Manila. One time we were at Pasay City and we took the MRT from Taft Avenue going to the North Avenue, to the end part of it. And then we noticed that when we entered the cabins at Taft Avenue, it wasn't filled yet with passengers. But as it travels as it passes through stations, we reached Ortigas Center. And we noticed that the cabins were already jam-packed with people. And while we were inside, I saw men seated, just the same with what I have seen at the jeepney terminal. Men were seated, ladies were standing, hanging on those railings inside the cabin. There were even pregnant women who were standing and trying to balance themselves as the MRT was traversing the rails going to the North Avenue. And I said again to myself, looking at this scenario, where are the gentlemen? It is rare to find gentlemen this time. That's a reality. If you found one, appreciate that person, because they are endangered species already. Rarely you would find a gentleman. But don't you know that being gentle is not just a Filipino trait, but it is actually advised by Jesus himself. If you look at the Sermon on the Mount, the very passage where we base our series, Blessed Are. We learned two of those in the previous Sundays, and today we will be looking at the statement of Jesus that says, Blessed are the gentle, for they shall inherit the earth. Now, as I was thinking about this passage, I said, why did Jesus place inheriting the earth as in a form of a reward if you are gentle? Now, here are some things that I have discovered. I discovered that the idea of gentleness in the book of Matthew chapter 5, verse 5, is not just a conceptual characteristic. It is not just an abstract understanding of being gentle, a person who is not harsh. But being gentle, if you look at Matthew chapter 5, verse 5, is a response of a person who was going through an affliction. I'll repeat. The word gentle, especially if you look at it from the original language, it does not pertain only to a person who is gentle in the way he acts. But that person who is described as gentle in the text is someone who is going through an affliction or an oppression from someone else, and that person endures the affliction without having a resentment in the heart about that person who afflicted him. So that's how it is understood there. That is why if I'm going to translate the original word into English, I will not use the word gentle. Instead, I will use the word meek. Because gentle is not being harsh to someone, but meekness is a state, a characteristic of a person who goes through something that is weighty, something that is painful, something that you can consider as an affliction, and yet that person continues with his life without having a resentment deep within him. That is how Jesus was thinking about this person that he described as gentle in the book of Matthew. Now, I was looking at the passage and tried to really scrutinize further as to why did he say this? And here is something that I have discovered when I look at the story among the people that were listening to Jesus. Listen very carefully. When Jesus spoke these words, he was not just giving a universal principle to the people listening to him, but he was actually addressing something within a particular culture. What was happening back then in the minds of the listeners was this. For many years in the past, the Jewish people were under foreign powers. I have kept on mentioning that in my previous sermons. During this time, they were under the Roman Empire, and the Romans were leading the land. They were actually the individuals that were having much benefits out of the produce of the land. They were leading, they were dominating the land. And one of those things that the Jewish people wanted to happen back then was, we want these foreigners out of our land. I think it was a natural reaction for a person who is a natural occupant of the land, and he is experiencing an oppression because there is a foreigner who has invaded the land and now has taken over the land. The natural tendency of that occupant is, I want this foreigner, I want this invader out of the land. Many of the Jews were thinking like that. In fact, if you look at the Gospels, there are individuals that formed a group called zealots. I don't know if you read this in the Gospels, but it's there. You could read several groups of people there, like the Pharisees, the Sadducees, there are the scribes, and the zealots. Now, the zealots are individuals who armed themselves with weapons and who tried to move around Galilee and even in the southern part of Israel, convincing Jewish people to revolt against the Romans. So they were saying, would you like to just live in this kind of life? That we are the owners of this land supposedly, and now it is being dominated by some foreigners. Will you just agree with that? And if the person would say, I don't like the presence of the Romans, and the next thing that they'll do is, why don't you join us? Let's form a group, let's raise our arms against the Romans, and let's fight them. Let's destroy this government. Those were the zealots. And then if you look at this socio-political situation, there must have been individuals among those people listening to Jesus that were thinking about this matter, and they were addressed by the Lord in a very personal manner. Take note. If you look at Matthew chapter 5, verse 1, it mentioned there that Jesus spoke before his disciples, okay? But as I have told you before, whenever the word disciple is used in the New Testament, it was used in two ways. First, it could pertain to the 12 individuals that Jesus personally trained. But not all the time. There were moments that Jesus himself or the gospel writers used the word disciples not to pertain only to the 12, but to all those people who followed the Lord. In this context, in the book of Matthew chapter 5, verse 1, when Matthew mentioned about the word disciples, he was pertaining not only to the 12, but to a crowd of individuals who started following the Lord. And this was the crowd that Jesus addressed with the Sermon on the Mount, with the Beatitudes, with the blessed are that we are talking about right now. So he was talking to the disciples, not only the 12, and there could have been individuals among the group, within the crowd, who were thinking that way. We hate the Romans. We don't like their presence in our land. We want them ousted from this place because this place belongs to us. And that is why Jesus told them, blessed are the meek or the gentle, for they shall inherit the earth. Oh, wait a minute. These people who were listening to the Lord had a different mindset. Their culture back then would dictate them that in order for you to conquer a land, you must be strong enough. In order for you to own a land, you must be able to have enough weapons and number of soldiers that you will be able to defeat the occupants of that particular area. You battle against them, you defeat them, and you get the land. That's how you should conquer a land back then. But Jesus was telling them something else. In the minds of these people, I gotta be strong. I have to overpower. I have to destroy my opponent. I have to oust these individuals forcefully so that I can take the land. But Jesus said, blessed are those who are meek or humble, for they shall inherit the earth. Jesus is giving something in a form of a counter-culture. Isn't this the culture of our time also? That when we think of owning something, getting something, oftentimes we do something that will really bring us to that scenario that what we desire, we will get it. That when someone would oppress us, we will do something in order for us to retaliate or to revenge or to respond with aggression. No wonder if someone hits us on the face, the higher possibility is that either we hit the person on the face also, or we file a case against that person. Why? Because that's our culture. That's how you and I have been shaped. The people in the time of Jesus actually had the same mindset just as we have today. If you are hurt, you pay the same. What you get, you give the same. And they were thinking, how come these Romans are still here? We want them removed from the land. That's why the zealots were there. Actually, it's not happening only in the socio-political scenario back in those days. But if you move forward to the writings of the Apostle Paul, it happened even within the church. You look at Ephesians chapter 4, verses 1 to 6. Paul said, I implore you to walk in a manner worthy of your calling. And in that infinitive, to walk in a manner worthy of your calling, he added a description, live with gentleness and humility. And the word gentleness has a similar understanding with the word gentle that Jesus mentioned in Matthew 5:5. What was happening inside the church? Inside the church of Ephesus, there were Jewish Christians and there were Gentile believers. Inside the church, there were two groups of people who had an enmity for a long time inside the church. That's why don't wonder if you are in a church and in that church there is a conflict. It's really a possibility because we have different backgrounds, we have different mindsets, we have different way of dealing with things, but we try our best with the power of the Spirit of God to come and live as God intends it to be, and that's the common thing that we have here. But back in those days, in the church of Ephesus, there were Jewish Christians and there were Gentile believers. Both groups, they believe in the Lord Jesus Christ. Both groups were part of the church. But something was insisted by the Jewish Christians to the Gentile believers. What were they saying? They were saying, we are part of this naturally, even if we would not have strong faith. Added to that is the idea that we have the blood of Abraham. We are really part of this, of the kingdom of God. But you Gentiles, you're a mixed-blooded people. That is why it's important that you go through the process, that you have to be circumcised. It's important that you go through the rituals so that you will be on the same status as what we are. So they were imposing something to the Gentile believers, and they were telling the Gentile believers that we Jewish Christians, we actually don't do these things. So you have to avoid the same thing. We don't eat this, you also have to do the same. When we avoid this kind of act, also do the same. So they were imposing a lot of things to the Gentile believers, and the Gentile believers were feeling oppressed that they were being required to do something greater than they think they could do because it wasn't part of their culture. So within the church, Paul reminded the believers, I implore you to walk in a manner worthy of your calling. You Gentiles, if you felt bad about these things that the Jewish believers were requiring from you, do not retaliate. Do not respond with aggression. Do not avenge. Why? Because you are citizens of God's kingdom. And the right response that you ought to show is that you respond with meekness or gentleness. So if you look at these both passages, in the book of Matthew and in the book of Ephesians, they are different situations, but there is something that is common in these two scenarios. Both of them, there are individuals who are feeling oppressed. There were individuals maybe who would have thought of avenging or responding with retaliation. But in both cases, Jesus and the Apostle Paul advised them to respond with meekness deep within them. When I say meekness, enduring the pain without resentment in the heart. If there is inflicted pain on you, and you don't respond to the person harshly, it's not meekness. If you have resentment in the heart. Are you following what Jesus is saying here? Because oftentimes, people don't respond aggressively and with aggression if you see your opponent and you know that you cannot defeat him or her. So you just remain silent because you know that there is something you cannot do. You know that you are nothing against the person. So you remain silent with resentment in the heart. It's not meekness. What Jesus was pointing here is that you know you can do something. You know you can even try to equal the strength of that person, and yet because you're living as a citizen of the kingdom, you just skip it. You endure the pain that you are going through without holding any resentment deep within the heart. It's hard. That's really crazy. Because what's natural for us is if we are inflicted with pain, we respond giving pain. Kung hindi natin kaya, we respond in a different way, na makaganti ka lang. I remember a story. One time, there were American soldiers who were deployed in South Korea. So when they arrived there, they had a problem. Their problem was they did not know how to speak the language. If you do not know how to speak the language of that particular place, you are in trouble. They go to the streets, the signages were all in Korean letters. So they were in trouble. So they met and made a decision. It's important that we hire someone, a local in the city. We will hire somebody who will buy things for us, somebody who can cook for us regularly. So they agreed, and then they offered that particular work to someone. And there was one young Korean boy who responded. He said, I am willing, of course, with a huge salary. So he was willing to do that, and he started working for them. A few days later, the Americans made fun of this Korean guy. One time, they tied his shoelaces without him knowing it. So when he wore the shoes, when he started walking, he didn't know that his shoelaces were tied. So he stumbled and fell down, and all of them laughed at him. There was even one time that they removed one of his clothes from where it was placed, and they put it on a wall that is high enough that he cannot reach. Koreans are commonly the same height with us, Filipinos. Americans are commonly tall. Though when I was there, not everyone is really 6-footer. There are also individuals who are just 5'4" and 5'5". But most of them are really tall. Maybe their height goes beyond 5'9" or 5'10". So when they played with this Korean boy, they hung the shirt, and he cannot reach it. They made fun of him several times for many, many weeks. Until one day, they noticed that the fun, the jokes that they were doing with this little guy were no longer funny. So they decided among themselves, let's stop this. This is not good anymore. One night, they gathered and they called this Korean boy and they told him, bro, we realize that what we have been doing to you is not good. The jokes that we had with you are no longer funny. So we all decided with regrets that we did it, and we decided to stop doing it to you. We are very sorry. And the Korean boy with the teary eyes looked at all of them and said, I am very thankful to the Lord because you finally realized that what you did to me was really wrong. So in your presence, I would also make a promise that I would never ever spit on your food again before I serve it to you. Iyahad ang ginaluwaan ang pagkaon sa mga Amerikano. He cannot retaliate against them because they were big people. But he revenged in a different form. That's the human tendency. If we cannot equal the strength of the person, we revenge in a different form. It's not meekness. What is being described here is that you try to endure the pain while you are going through the affliction without resentment. And how can that happen? The same understanding was used by the psalmist in Psalm 37. That he was going through pain and he said, I will remain gentle. Because the psalmist knew that the God whom he served is not sleeping. And he knew that in due time, that God will work things out in his behalf. Oftentimes, people would place the problem on our hands and will do something. And that is why we create troubles. Jesus is telling the people, not only the people back then, but even all of us today, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Gentleness, meekness is advised by the Lord. So if those Filipino gentlemen are gone already, maybe it's a time to awaken gentleness, meekness in the hearts of the believers. I know there could be pain that you go through in your life, in your house, in your work, wherever you may be. There can be tensions that would happen. But when you go through such a tension in life, just go through it, endure it without resentment in the heart, knowing that your God is watching over you. If the words of Jesus is just socio-political, the implication is like that. That you and I ought to live with an understanding that God who sees the meta-narrative, the overall story of our lives, let's trust Him. Let's leave it to Him. The words that Filipino would often use whenever there is a huge problem, and sometimes you feel that I have to do something in the midst of this because I feel afflicted. And instead of acting violently or with aggression, you would just say, si Lord na lang bahala dyan sa kanya. That's actually meekness. You knew you can do something, but it's gonna hurt the other party. And you would say, si Lord na lang bahala. That's actually what Jesus is saying. And in relation, if Jesus was not simply talking about the socio-political situation back then, if it has eschatological implication, maybe he's talking about inheriting the land when Jesus Christ comes back and destroys all these evil things in the world and rebuilds it for those citizens of the kingdom. It's fascinating to think about what Jesus said in Matthew 5:5. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. If I look at history, you know what? There were strong individuals who lived in this world, who led empires and dynasties. But where are they now? They are gone. Think of the ancient history. You would see the Assyrians came to power and they were gone. You see the Babylonians came to power, they disappeared. Where are their lands? They disappeared as far as their ownership is concerned. The Persians came, the Greeks came, the Romans came. They all disappeared as far as their influence over the lands this time. You go to the modern time, you would see there the Han Dynasty. You would see the Ottoman Empire. You would see the Mongolians rising up to power. You would see the Russians coming to power. And now they are not as powerful as before right now. You think about the Great Britain Empire. These were empires in the past. They expanded their land so vastly all over the world, and yet they disappeared. No one among them kept everything when they were at the height of their power. They started to become smaller and smaller until most of them, if not all, disappeared. But listen very carefully. More than 2,000 years ago, the darling of heaven came into this world. And he gathered his disciples and he said, Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Listen very carefully. Where are the Christians today? You go to any place of the world, there are Christians. Christianity was pronounced more than 2,000 years ago. Empires rose up and they disappeared. Christianity was built and it still exists until our time. And it is conquering the whole world. You know what? Jesus has proven somehow that blessed are those who are meek, for they shall inherit the earth. My friends, there are spots that we try our very best to get it for ourselves. There are conflicts and tensions that we go through that we feel so heavy. But let's try the advice of the Lord to respond with gentleness or meekness, going through the pain, the tension, without resentment in the heart. Because at the end of the day, our trust is not on our ability, but on the one who has called us. He is not sleeping. He knows what you go through. He is familiar with your pain, and He's going to do something on your behalf. Because your King, the King of the kingdom in which you and I belong, He watches over His constituents, and you are part of it. God bless you all, and good evening.